All right. So, how do you want to do this? Do you want to read your poetry? Do you want me to read your poetry? Do you want to dive in? What's the plan?
Well, it would be great to hear you read your poetry, and then I can share 2 poems of mine, if that sounds good to you. And congratulations again on having your work included in the Clarendon House anthology. Grant Husson does a good job with publishing all the different anthologies.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I got it from you, so I wouldn't have submitted if not having read your own poetry first. So it looked like a pretty interesting opportunity, and it was kind of a funny story. I emailed Grant and I said in the email, I'm interested in being part of the anthology, and I attached a poem to it, and I was like, I just want to know really if this is appropriate, like if it's something that maybe you'd be interested in, if I need some help, if it's not quality enough. And he got back to me and was like, all right, you're good. I'm accepting it.
Brilliant.
So I didn't expect that in the response, that he would just take the poem at face value, but it worked out really well.
Yes, I am very thankful for what he does, and I'm very glad that it all came to fruition with you, and appreciate your encouragement and your kind words. I always enjoy help friends getting their work out there, and our friendship started with at a Switchfoot John Foreman concert, and striking up a conversation about C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, Emily Dickinson, T.S. Eliot, and here we are.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It was two guys being super early.
Yes, yeah. We were there. What was it? A few hours before the show, and that was 2019, wasn't it?
That's a good question. It was several years ago, but I know I was at least 2 hours early, and my experience with concerts was, because I hadn't done the VIP, like the meet and greet and stuff, I didn't realize that with VIP, you just get in line and, you're fine. You don't have to worry about being late or early. So my experience had been, if you're not early, you'll probably not be close or not get to experience anything. So I think I was the first one there, and I think you might have been right behind me, but, I arrived at Wilmington at the venue, and I was like, wow, this is so nice. I have such good parking. There's no one here. I'm ahead of the game.
Yes.
But it turns out I was just way too early.
Yes. Yeah, and that was a great concert. Switchfoot are incredible live, and what an incredible band that makes music for people of all worldviews, and while still being honest about their doubts and faith in Christ. I'm very thankful for their music.
Sure. Well, if you want me to go first, I'll read first from Poetica 22.
Yeah.
So this is Poetica, for those who are watching the video back. We both have work published. How many volumes are you published in, do you know?
If I'm not mistaken, as far as the Poetica volumes by Clarendon House, maybe 7 or 8.
Whoa, nice.
Thank you.
So I'm not too far behind. I'll catch up.
You will, yes, and congratulations again for your second poem published. And I know, I'm quite sure with the next anthology, Grant will accept it. He sometimes has rejected some of mine, but I appreciate his honesty, and he's always offered good constructive criticism. But for the most part, he's accepted the ones I've submitted, which is very, very thankful for. So congratulations again.
Thank you. Same to you. All right, I'll go ahead and read my first one here. I think we're both toward the back on this one. Let's see. We're pretty close by each other, actually, too, which is cool. All right, this one's called Afterlife Stuff.
Yeah.
This one was my first submission to Poetica, so I'll go ahead and read it, and then let's get your initial raw reaction. As with many nights before, my eyes slid open and perceived the dark. The dead of night offers little more than imperceptible stops and starts. A glance to the left, then to the right, various shapes full and alive. I pulled the comforter level with my chin and closed in a box. Is this casket or skin? One or more of the cracks in the floor belong to the ghouls outside the door. The softness sweeping against my face, is it the breath of death or air displaced? In these still moments, while etherized and compromised, only a concrete sign can identify a state of death or life, a steady rise and fall. The funeral of the brain, a numbness of the mind, is the same as the apex between inhale and exhale. The moment reason snapped and slipped away. What if this is the afterlife? The world but dark and imperceptible, paralyzed bodies spread out on a rigid table, with shadows growing, creeping, shifting, sleeping next to us. But we can't move, we can't shake, we can't cry or fake a smile. The distinct features of our faces blend into a new amorphous shape. So in this moment of death, let's work to perceive the mind of the narrator. What will we achieve at the point of understanding? a holistic reprieve from the suffering of life before we conceive a plan to escape this paralysis. Indeed, take heed.
Very moving. Very, very moving. Like the rhyme scheme, I could certainly see a T.S. Eliot, C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, and Emily Dickinson influence on it. And for me, when I read it the first time, and now hearing you read it yourself, for me at least, the moving theme from it that I get is the importance of living in the present in the context of knowing that death is coming. And that's not morbid. It as you know, it gives life great meaning, and every moment is precious, and your relationships and experiences and memories that you carry with you throughout your life. So that's, to me, the brevity of life and the gift of the present and community and people in your life, all the good sacramental things in life, music, literature, art, community work, rest, travel, adventure, love, joy. So those are the things that come to mind after hearing you read it and after having read it myself. So it was very, very poignant, and appreciate your work.
Cool. Yeah, it's definitely, you probably have caught the theme, but I write about death a lot. So.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's very much in the vein of Dickinson of I don't think it was Dickinson that calls death her boy, but might have been Sexton, but one of them calls death her boy. But it's kind of like a keep your enemies close kind of thing. But I think both poems of mine, at least, are connected in the sense that life and death are so close and tightly wound with each other. So
yeah,
I love the call out to Eliot, because the one image that I kind of stole for this poem was the body stretched out on the table from Proof Rock. So that was my little nod to Eliot in that one.
Yeah. Yeah, Eliot and Dickinson are both great, and I could certainly see the influence on your poem, and so thanks for sharing what inspired it.
Sure, yeah. And there's also, Clarendon's doing the Great Writing Challenge right now, but I submitted a flash fiction piece for that as well, which ended up being included in the second volume of entries. But very much like in my flash fiction piece, I make the action of breathing like a character. I do like to personify breath in a lot of different ways, so that was another thing that I kind of had in the back of my mind. But anytime that I can add little characters into the piece without kind of making them characters, I try to do that. It's just fun.
Yeah, that joy you experience in the creative process, whether you're writing fiction or poetry or nonfiction, where you have an idea, you're not quite sure where it's going to go, and it's as if it has already been written, but you're just used as a vessel, and you have that element of surprise, even though you have the idea, and it ends up being maybe a bit different than you thought it would be. And that's always an interesting experience that I've had in my own work. So I know what you mean.
Well, do you want to read one of yours?
Sure.
Feel free to read anything you want. You don't have to go with Poetica. It can be anything.
Sure. Let's see. I'll read one from the same volume with the peacock.
Now, I know you're close by me, so I'm going to try to follow.
Thanks, mate. So, yes, this poem is called It's a Wonderful Life, and I did get the title from the old classic film, It's a Wonderful Life, which is brilliant, moving, iconic, and I will, read it and share some of the inspiration behind it afterwards. So, it's a wonderful life. It's a wonderful life. Despite the doubts, questions, confusion, and pain, there is goodness, beauty, conversation, and love, healing, laughing, saying good morning and good night, walking in the glorious sunshine, light drizzle, and pouring rain, clasping hands tightly through youth and old age. It is a brief and beautiful, wonderful life.
Yeah, beautiful. I didn't even think of the movie when I read the title, but that makes 100%, that makes a lot of sense.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, that was inspired like yours. The brevity of life, that's what I was trying to capture in it. The pain, the doubts, that's part of the journey, but the joy and the goodness, beauty, truth, it is greater than the pain and the doubts and the questions. And I could never write anything that's nihilistic. Of course, you always want to be honest, but I always like to leave the reader with the sense of the virtues of hope, courage, and a sense of joy. So that's what inspired that poem.
Yeah, it's really nice. If you don't mind, I'll just point out a couple of thoughts that I had while reading it as well. So one thing that I like about your poetry that I started picking up on, I've obviously read a couple of the like collections, but it's so something that I don't do well is it's very musical. So I hate to be that guy and make the Tolkien connection, but you know, it's like the Hobbit song. It's like a very musical quality. So I especially like the, you know, the not so much choppy lines, but the flowy lines. So I like the, you know, all the little tricks that you do with sort of internal rhyme and in rhyme, but it is very musical. So I think that's really cool. And I'm definitely not a musical writer.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. Yeah, and every writer has their own approach. I like the rhyme scheme that you included in yours. And with this said, I don't understand all the different, you know, iambic, pentameter, and tetrameter, and all the different forms that you can use. I know, just from memory, like the sonnet, this is embarrassing. Oh my goodness. Sonnet is 13 or 14 lines.
I feel like it's 13, but it's probably going to be 14 because usually it's not the one that you remember that it is.
I always forget. Is it 13 or 14? I can't quite recall, but there's definitely a musical rhyme scheme element to yours that I appreciated as well. And although I like free verse, I do prefer, like, you know, the rhyme scheme poetry that you find in John Keats and Robert Frost and Emily Dickinson's. Well, I guess, though with Emily Dickinson, she is more free verse, like T.S. Eliot. It's, even though there is a rhyme scheme that they use, it's beyond me. But yeah, so those are some thoughts about that.
Yeah, there's a really interesting move from, you know, like Brit Lit and the Romanticism kind of era to modernism and postmodernism, and writers really getting away from like a really tight rhyme scheme and sort of breaking the rules because it suits the purpose of the poem a lot more. So, I think by today, like by the time we reach postmodernism, we're obviously a lot more creative with the way we create rhyme. So, but I will say the challenge of writing things like a sonnet or writing things in iambic pentameter is good sometimes because it keeps us on our toes. And I have written a sonnet before, but only one, and I'll never write another one because it was tough.
They are very challenging. I will say that. I've written a few, and although I enjoyed it and some aspects of it was fun, I found it to be quite a lot of work, as you were just describing.
Yeah, for sure. I'm trying to see if there's anything else. Did you have any references in there? I mean, I know you kind of generally stick to your theme and your subject matter, but were there any like call-outs or references for you?
Not in that particular one that come to mind, but in the next one I'll read after you share yours, there's one that I was thinking about it earlier as I was preparing for our conversation that I'll share.
Oh, all right. Well, if you want to, I'll just move on to the second one.
Sure.
And give it a quick read.
Yeah.
I know this one is also, for me, toward the back. Yours was closer to the middle. While I'm digging through, where are you living now? I know you're not living in the States anymore. You're in the UK, right?
Yes, in Glasgow, Scotland.
I've always, when I was little, I would pronounce it Glasgow, but I was extremely uneducated. It's obviously Glasgow. So just a couple words about this one. For my second piece, I'm trying to do a trilogy. So I wanted to do 3 interconnected poems, starting with Afterlife Sleep being a really like intimate experience. The second one, this one's called The Man Who Haunts My House. This one's much more literary. It's a lot more traditional when it comes to the intent of it and the themes of it. And then for the third one, I'm going to kind of take a page out of your book, and I think I'm going to call it Eternal. But a lot more like free verse, a lot tighter, a lot shorter. And instead of talking about death, I kind of want to talk about things that don't die. So that's the sort of the bookend of the trilogy. But so that's just a preview for the next publication.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this is part 2. This is the one that I think is a lot more of an ode to traditional literature.
Really?
All right, The Man Who Haunts My House. By noon we work in tandem to make this worm cave our home. Breathing in the black air, we welcome worm, elf, or gnome. We scrub the walls, 12-fingered beast, and set the silence free. He moves as if he knows my thoughts and persists ahead of me. The sun cast strikes across the floor, prison bars or blinds. I perceive his shape within the flames, then lose it to my mind. By evening he steps closer, no longer in disguise. He stands behind my shoulders and borrows both my eyes. I stop pretending that I don't see his shadow staring back. He's always been ahead of me, guiding me along the tracks. This death feels like a memory, a bookend on a shelf. I wonder if I've always been a ghost inside myself. No final words, no true release, no bright light or crown. Just him and me, piece by piece, unraveling without a sound. The walls no longer know my name, the bed no longer stirs. Inside the house is only this, a breath without a word.
Very, very good. Very good. Again, it's very poignant. It is very musical. Again, I like the rhyme scheme, and when I was hearing it, what I think, and correct me if I'm mistaken, at least my interpretation of it is you're writing about human duality and identity and how complex of a thing that is, trying to understand who we are. So that's what comes to mind, at least when you were reading it, and you delivered it in a very, very good way. I think it's very poignant, and I could certainly relate to it, especially, with the complexity of daily life and coming to grips with yourself and trying to understand your own paradoxes and idiosyncrasies and contradictions in your own life, and trying to choose goodness and beauty and truth, even when you might feel cynical or you're struggling with depression or whatever it might be, certain circumstance going on. So you're exploring quite a lot in that poem.
Yeah, I appreciate the interpretation. So with this one, I wanted to, because the first one I felt was sort of a teachy poem, so I wanted to really sort of craft a theme and drive it home. With this one, I wanted to write something to be interpreted.
Yeah.
I was really thinking about, how can the reader take the piece and sort of relate to it and pull something meaningful out of it. So the cool thing about this one is there isn't a correct interpretation. This one is totally up to the person that consumes it. So there are definitely things that I think are super literal about it.
Yeah.
I think it could be about death. Obviously, the thing that haunts us all is our own end, our own ending. I also think it could be about Christ or Allah or whatever God you believe in, because in a lot of ways our faith haunts us and we live with that God, throughout life. And then I think it can also be about me. So I can haunt myself. I can be my own ghost. I can be, the physical driver of my thoughts and actions. And whenever I die, I'm going to be by myself. Like, I don't get to go through that experience with anyone else. So it's totally left up to interpretation. It's not a strict point or theme. There are a couple of references that I used to kind of pull some imagery out. The second chunk of it, the piece about the black air and the 12-fingered beast, that was almost totally stolen from Sexton and Her Kind. So
yeah,
if you read Her Kind, you'll see it almost word for word in some spots. And then I don't know if you're familiar with the play Hamilton.
I have not seen Hamilton, to my utter regret. I've been told very, very good things, that it's amazing and brilliant and thought-provoking. So it's in the queue to watch. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, so there's, in the end of the poem, another thing that really inspired me to write this one. At the end of the play, whenever Aaron Burr and Hamilton are dueling, Hamilton talks about imagining death like a memory. And I was like, that is a really cool image, and I'm going to steal that.
Yeah.
So the last third of my poem, I really play with death feeling like a memory. So those are the two pieces that really inspired a lot of the imagery. Again, I wanted to be super vague and super literary and let the reader take it wherever they want to go. So I felt like I accomplished that to some degree.
Yeah, certainly so. And that's wonderful when you give that freedom to the reader instead of having a particular agenda behind what you're doing. I suppose some works of art can be that way, and that's okay. Some works of art are more literal, but as you were trying to achieve in that, you wanted more mystery and room for freedom and various interpretations, and I certainly appreciate that approach.
Yeah, awesome. All right, well, cool. I appreciate the thoughts. I think that the Afterlife Sleep was a lot easier to write just because it was not a literary piece that I staged for an intent. I just kind of wrote what I was feeling at the time.
Yeah.
But I think I'm probably more proud of this one because I think if you put it in like a selection of poetry, it would be accessible. And I think as a writer, that's kind of where you want to get eventually.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm excited about it, and I'm excited to hear yours because I really like this one too.
Thank you. Yes. So I've yet to get the Poetica 23 as a paperback, but what I'll do is I'll pull it up here and let's see, just give me just a second. I'll give it.
You're fine, no problem.
Give it a read. The paperback should be arriving in the next week. I'm looking forward to it. And again, congratulations on your poem being included in the volume. I really like the cover of that one. Let's see, just a second here. Bear with me, Travis.
Oh, you're good, no problem. Yeah, I like this cover too a lot. It's really abstract and it's got a lot of bright color.
Yes, yeah. Like a kaleidoscope. Yes. All right. So this is Glasgow. On a walk in Glasgow on a fine August day, feeling the breeze and the warm sunshine on my face, a poem came to my mind, Seamus Heaney's Digging, and I thought to myself, although I, like every other person living in time, is slowly dying, I am in the present filled with joy, gladly living.
Yeah, really, I'm trying to think of a good anecdotal comparison, but it's very much like set up with your kind of musical poetic piece, and then you hit it at the end with your like 2-line main point or 2-line theme. So that's a really cool technique to use, because obviously you want to give the reader a little bit of fluff and a little bit of fun stuff, but then you also want to make your point.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, that was inspired by a beautiful, warm August day in Glasgow, and I remember just walking around, looking at everyone, just trying to be present, and the Seamus Heaney poem Digging came to mind, and it's an incredible poem. It's a poem that's an ode to his father, who was a cattle farmer, and also what came to mind were a few other things from personal experience about the fact that although we are living in the present, we are dying, and a lot of, as you know, John Foreman's music explores that contradiction of breathing in, breathing out, living, but also dying, death being I get not the final arrival, but the coming to an end and trying to embrace life from that perspective, beauty of the present moment, instead of being so obsessed about the past or the future, which is really, I find it really challenging, but I've been trying to get better about living in the present and cultivating that, and every day, at least attempting to. And the joy that is part of the journey of life. And it was very meaningful to write that. It was very cathartic and brought me joy to include Seamus Heaney into it. He's my favorite poet. He was the second Irish poet to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. And I really like the fact that he was, although just a brilliant scholar and academic, I had an incredible understanding of language. I, knew the Irish language. I think a couple other different languages, translated Beowulf and some other medieval poems into the English language. But he was always, he was known as very humble and as like an Irish countryman, and I really appreciate his simplicity. I've talked with a few people who met him and someone who knew him, and it was really moving to hear about their recollections of how humble and down to earth he was, and I can relate to that, especially being from the mountains of North Carolina. Rustic, earthy people in Appalachia are great, and I found that here in Glasgow. And Glasgow is it's very different from Edinburgh. Edinburgh is beautiful architecture, bookshops, pubs, but I have found that Glasgow is more homely to me because it's more blue collar and working class, and I relate to that more. And it has a charm and character to it that I haven't found in Edinburgh. Very quirky. Glasgow is an artistic town in its own right, but again, just more blue collar, also working class, and I've become very fond of the city, so I wanted to write a poem that was an ode to Glasgow as well, expressing my affection for the city.
Yeah, you do a good job of location stuff. Like I noticed in your collections, there's up to this location, and that location, and there's a lot of admiration, not just for like the physical aspect of it, but the spiritual undertone that sort of comes to the surface when you're there. So it's a very relatable experience to humans, so it's nice to be able to put it into words. I also really like the call out to a specific poem.
Yeah.
Similar to mine, like I was really thinking about Her Kind a lot when I wrote my poem by Sexton, but you did a better job. You called it right out in the verse, so it's a lot easier to figure out what you're talking about.
Yeah, thanks, mate. I appreciate that. Yeah, I've read some of Anne Sexton's work in some different anthologies, and I really enjoyed the poems by Sexton that I read, but I'll have to check out more of her work since you have good taste, and I'll look forward to reading a whole volume of her work.
Yeah, I'm a big sucker for the Confessionals. Those are my top, Sexton, Plath, Hughes, all of the confessional poets, and they're a really small, eclectic bunch, and most of them had horrific, tragic ends, of course, but the visceral and direct and sharp language and imagery in the poems are, in a lot of ways, a huge predecessor for modern poetry, because we live in the selfie generation. It's all about me. I don't know that we get there without work, by the Confessionals and other writers who are trying to take their personal experience, which might have been really painful and brutal, and translate it into beautiful literature.
Yeah, and you can't help but admire that honesty, even though sadly, yes, those poets had tragic ends. It's very moving seeing how their work has encouraged people, and they found a kindred spirit in the work. I've talked with, especially with Sylvia Plath, I've talked with many people who have found great solace in her work, and I've read Ariel and some of her other poems. But it's incredibly moving when you see the impact that they've had on people who have the same existential struggles as honest. You don't get any of these shallow platitudes or dishonesty. You get good, honest, authentic works of art, and no wonder why they stood the test of time and people are still resonating with their poetry.
I got a question for you, just kind of looking through. I mean, you're a lot more, when it comes to verse, you're a lot more free than I am. It seems like you have long lines, short lines, single word, multi-word. You do a lot of internal rhyme. Sometimes you'll do in rhyme. So it's a lot more maybe palatable just because you kind of mix it up with your style. But I'm curious if there are any like punctuation things or structure things that you do like to repeat, or maybe something that you just kind of automatically do without thinking and you're writing a lot.
Yeah, that's a great question. What was helpful for me when I first started to read poetry, Robert Frost was the first one, and from him would go to John Keats, John Donne, and more modern poets like Mary Oliver, Annie Dillard, Padraig O'Tuama, and seeing the differences in how they use punctuation or even Walt Whitman he's another good example. W.B.H. Seamus Heaney, seeing how they use exclamation marks and commas and sometimes no punctuation. It was interesting to me, and I found it to be very helpful when crafting my own. I was trying to understand the rules of poetry. I know you can't be obsessed with that because it's going to come out, and you can edit and you can revise, but I do like to include sometimes even a hyphen or a period or an exclamation mark whenever I'm crafting it. And not knowing exactly where it's going, sometimes when I've written it out the first time, I'll have the punctuation exactly like I want it, or sometimes I'll leave the poem alone for a few days or even a week and go back and reread it and think, where would I like to include a comma here or an exclamation mark here, a hyphen here, or even a period here, and why? Or sometimes I'm not going to include any punctuation at all, and why is that, and try to see where that question leads as I'm editing, revising. So it's interesting how it has turned out in different ways.
Yeah, it's something that I started doing in high school, and I did it all through college and creative writing classes, and still to this day do it. But I'm a big advocate for the dash. You'll notice that if you start kind of looking through my stuff, it's just dashes galore. I love to state an idea, dash, and then add more information. It's somewhat Dickinson-esque, but a lot of the early American novelists do it too. And I think it's sort of like a dying art form. People don't really dash anymore. But
yeah,
I'm a big believer in the dash. And, like Dickinson does weird capitalization, and you have like Cummings who does a lot of times no capitalization, and people have their own little hallmark pieces. But I have a feeling that when I look back on my fingerprints on stuff that, that's something that will probably always be there. I can't get away from it.
One particular way, and keep using the dash, my friend, you found one of those wonderful quirks about language that you enjoy using, and I can relate. in the context of the exclamation mark. I've really enjoyed using mostly. Yeah, there's some commas and periods and etc., but just that emphasis on something that's important and deliberate. So I appreciate your use of the dash. And when you're saying that, if I recall, Emily Dickinson's "I Could Not Stop for Death," isn't that one of the poems where she uses the dash in?
Yeah, she uses it all over the place. She's like the sort of the foil to Whitman, where Whitman's just long line after long line after long line, just never ending thoughts, just stream of consciousness. And then you have Dickinson with these tiny little stanzas, and 6 lines will take you 6 hours to figure out what's actually happening. But
yes,
her collections are just full of dashes.
Yeah, and what an incredible poet she was, and I don't think she had any idea what she would accomplish in her vocation as a poet. I really enjoy her work. I love the line. I can't remember the title of the poem from memory, but I remember the line. There is no frigate like a book. Is that the line? I think I'll have to look it up and send it to you. There is frigate, not a word that's commonly used in the 21st century, but it's basically a poem that's an ode to the power of books and how they can transport you to places and how imagination and reason comes together. That's one of the best ones by her. But of course, as you know, she has so many good ones. The hope is the thing with feathers, and again, I could not stop for death. Yeah, she's phenomenal.
Yeah, she's, I agree. I don't think that she would have suspected that, post-life, that 1,800 pieces, little snippets of her brain would end up, becoming legendary and inspiring so many writers. And if I remember, I don't know exactly how many, but it was probably less than 10 pieces that got published during her lifetime of hers. It was a very, very small count of poems that made it to publication, but I think either sister or sister-in-law, somebody like immediate family, found these little binders stitched together with all of her stuff and started getting it published. And now obviously she's one of the great American writers, but they all have unique stories. But I had a Whitman Dickinson class in college, and I always favored Dickinson, and a couple of my professors like Whitman a lot. And I do like some of Whitman's stuff. It's just very wordy. There's just a lot going on.
Yeah, I've read bits of Leaves of Grass, and it was interesting, but yeah, as far as personal preference, I do prefer Dickinson over Whitman, though I appreciate him. Yeah, he's just going on about in the Taylors and the Bakers, and the list goes on and on and on.
I mean, I guess we can't talk too poorly, though. I mean, considering Tolkien, and Tolkien can spend like 6 pages giving us like a Hobbit song and talking about like the quality of birch on the trunk of the tree and all that good stuff.
Yes, he was very meticulous, very pedantic, and I have talked with people who really wanted to enjoy his works, but they, like one friend, this was years ago, was telling me that they loved The Hobbit, but they could not get through The Lord of the Rings, and it was funny, and you can appreciate that, at least the individual attempts at it, but yeah, Tolkien is very meticulous. I know, he's hit or miss with people. I've talked with people who love Lewis's prose, and whether it's his fiction or nonfiction, or even George MacDonald, they prefer their prose over Tolkien, and they just can't stomach Tolkien's prose, whereas other people prefer Tolkien's prose over Lewis's. So it's always interesting to hear people's feedback. But as far as his meticulous writing, I have found his description of landscape, whether it's, the Rivendell or Lothlorien, to be it's so powerful, at least to me, that he evokes the transcendent. And I know that I don't think that sounds like madness, but his descriptions of landscape to me are that powerful. But, again, it's entirely subjective. So it's interesting always to hear people's subjective perspectives on particular writers.
Yeah, we'll have to do a video sometime on like Lewis versus Tolkien, and have one of us represent Lewis and one represent Tolkien, and go back and forth. That would be a really interesting debate.
That would be good.
I definitely appreciate Tolkien's world building. I think that as far as world building in fantasy, it's unmatched just because of the detail. Like, you're not going to get a much better picture of what he's trying to talk to you about. But I think from maybe a spiritual perspective, I probably align more with Lewis.
Yeah.
just the super honest and emotional discussion on Christianity and just belief in general.
Yeah.
And I will say, even though I love both The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, all the pieces of Tolkien, the last, or not the last piece, but the chapter where Aslan is kind of roaring Narnia into life and Lewis is giving that picture of the world.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite pieces in all of literature. And nothing from Tolkien can touch that for me.
That's a very powerful moment when Aslan sings Narnia into being in it. And that's, I know what you mean. It's changed for me because Lewis used to be my favorite writer. And I will always have great respect for the Irish Ulsterman. But within the past year, I've found more of a kindred spirit in Tolkien, and I never thought that would change. And not that it's a competition, but it has. And friends have been shocked by, wow, Justin Wiggins, who used to say the Belfast Ulsterman was his favorite author and always will be. And I always will have the greatest respect for Lewis. You know, he was such a gifted communicator. And like you were just saying, his prodigious output, science fiction, fairy tales, and literary criticism, poetry, theological, philosophical works, amazing what he achieved. So, yeah, I mean, you could give good arguments for why you find more of a kindred spirit in Lewis, or why you think he might be a better writer. But just where I've been at in my life, I've found more of a kindred spirit in Tolkien's work. And I've never read Tolkien more intensely than I have. It's wonderful when you see the encouragement and friendship that they had in their lives. I think that's very, very, very important. But also discussing their differences and opinions on literature, theology, whatever it might be. They were very different, but also they had that common love for myth and a common bond in faith, and both loved their pipes and beer, tea, and the pubs and walks in the countryside, and love for literature and life. Their friendship is incredible, and I, as probably like yourself, you encounter so many. Their works are universal, whether Christian, Hindu, pagan, atheist, agnostic, Jew, Muslim, Unitarian, Sikh. Works are for people of all worldviews. I talk with people from all walks of life who might disagree with their worldview, but they really appreciate their work, and their writing has meant a lot to them. So it's been interesting having conversations with people that have been moved and their lives have been changed in some way by their works.
This came to my mind like mid monologue when you were talking, but I have to correct myself. I think I said The Horse and His Boy, but it was The Magician's Nephew. It wasn't The Horse and His Boy.
That is right. Yeah.
Because I got to go back and fix that, because someone would definitely catch that. Which a lot of people don't care that much for Magician's Nephew, but I think the book itself kind of gets a little bit overlooked because it's followed up by The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which chronologically, but I think The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was written first. But I think in the story of Narnia, I think it's book 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. Horse and His Boy, not my favorite. It would be Magician's Nephew.
Yeah, I agree. The Magician's Nephew is my favorite of all the Narnia books. All the others are good in their own right, but yeah, as you were describing, that moment when Aslan sings Narnia into being is really powerful. That does evoke the numinous and the transcendent. I had a transcendent experience reading that for the first time when I was a confused agnostic and trying to find healing and hope and embrace faith in Jesus of Nazareth. But then that particular story and Switchfoot John's music, Tolkien and MacDonald, they all played a huge role in that journey.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely recommend, if I'm going to throw out like something that I really love that you've written, just the poem Tirnanog. That's a really good example. I think one of my favorites from your collections. Definitely, it's one of your longer pieces as far as I can remember, because you do a lot of play with like shorter pieces like the ones that are published that you read today. But Tirnanog, if I'm not mistaken, is one of your longer poems.
Yes, thank you for your kind words. And yeah, it was very meaningful to write that. Very difficult, especially with how honest it was about the existential crisis, father abandonment struggles, but also it's hopeful, with the power of music, literature, and art, and embracing a spiritual worldview, thanks to Seamus Heaney and Lewis and others that weren't deliberately mentioned in it, and the myth of Tirnanog. And so I appreciate you sharing that and being a supporter of my works, and I'm glad to support your own work, and I'm glad you're writing poetry and getting work in the the Clarendon House anthologies. Grant does such a brilliant job, and I know he's glad to include your work and all the other individuals that have included in it as well.
Yeah, for sure. I love the concept because there are so many writers who don't have that venue for publication. And poetry is an interesting method of writing because, when it comes to prose and when it comes to like plays and other forms of pen to paper, you really have to have a quality of relationship with the reader. In order for prose to be successful, it has to be palatable. It has to be relatable. You can't just write an epic and then people love it immediately. There has to be characters they can connect to. But poetry is a little different because with poetry, you can have powerful melody, you can have powerful imagery, you can have all these different things that don't necessarily need that connection. They can just be high quality writing. So I like the fact that there are people who can get their work out there who may not have another option for publication.
Yeah, he does a brilliant job with that. He's helped people find their own voice as a writer and publishes writers all over the world, different worldview and cultural backgrounds that, like you were just saying, that don't have I didn't have a connection with Tor or Harper Collins when I started out, and I never expected to, coming from a small town, North Carolina. So it's really important, I think, what he's doing, and I really appreciate what he's done through the Clarendon House anthologies.
Yes, I'm curious. Are you working on anything right now as far as, like, I know you have a book you're working on for next year, and, what are you writing right now? What's at the forefront of your brain?
So the most recent poem was inspired by a book by Mary Oliver called Blue Horses. I found a cheap paperback copy of it at a secondhand bookshop, and I've really enjoyed reading Mary Oliver's work. It makes you, as good poetry does, makes you pause and stop and think and reflect, or you feel the poet's sadness or joy, or this poem is an enigma and it's very mysterious, like your second one you shared, and open to various interpretations. So I tried my hand at a poem called Ode to Mary Oliver that I'll submit for the next Poetica anthology. And the most recent story was called The Realm of the Fae that I submitted for the next Galaxy science fiction fantasy poetry anthology. And the most recent, and another one was published recently in honor of Steve Caught of Inspired. Show the cover of it just really quickly. So it's called Writing from the Heart.
It's beautiful, yeah.
Yeah, and it's really meaningful because Steve Caught was a friend, and he did such a brilliant job with Inspired and like Grant, publishing people of different worldviews and cultural backgrounds. He published some of my books, and he sadly passed away back in August, and we were planning to meet, and before that we had a Zoom meeting once and corresponded through email. So he felt like a brother. I felt like I'd known him for years, and he had a heart failure, and it was really sad. Fortunately, his family's had a lot of good support, and his son Charlie Caught, which is really encouraging, has taken over Inspire as the editor. And Charlie Caught put it together, and it was collected by J. Jenkins Scott, Robbie Taylor, and illustrated by Adam Stanley. And I had a short poem in it called Writer, so having that included meant quite a lot, and I'm looking forward to reading through the book sometime this coming week. So that was in honor of Steve Caught.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's been really meaningful. The next thing, I'll just edit and revise the book next year. Of course, you know me very well that I couldn't help but call it Celtic Bardic tradition.
I mean, you have to have something related to Celtic in the title for sure.
Yeah, how can
the Celtic Twilight, the Celtic Dawn.
Yeah, so that was really meaningful to compile. It's just basic. It has some new poems and stories in it, but it's basically a collection of nonfiction and older nonfiction and poetry and fiction over the years, with some new pieces that are included in one book, and that will be published by Dark Myth Publishing sometime next year. They're a publisher in Canada, and I'm really thankful for the opportunity. It was really meaningful to work on that, and this academic rigorous work here at the University of Strathclyde Library Science program, which has been it's been interesting and engaging, but quite intense. And I just needed a creative outlet to keep me grounded, So
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, you can only do so much academic reading.
Oh my!
You have to throw in something that's some type of new album, some type of new poetry. Like you have to break it up a little bit.
Yeah, I know what you mean, my friend. How about yourself? You've got other ideas for poems or stories or a book or what do you?
Yeah, so I'm going to work on the third piece that I really want to do. Like I said, is going to be called Eternal, and it's going to be like the bookend to the first two. So I really wanted to do a trilogy of poems that were all like cousins to each other, kindred to each other. So like I said, I kind of started with a really narrow idea and then expanded to make it more interpretive and literary. And I want to do something that's more free verse and more flowy and musical and a tighter piece, like a shorter, like one stanza piece. Just talking about like things that are brighter and happier than my super sad death poems.
Yeah.
So that's kind of on my mind. I know I have, about a month and a half to get it done, but I'm trying to think of imagery that I really like and a couple of references that I can use. I did submit a flash fiction piece for the writing challenge, and it is a biographical piece about my wife, and I'm really excited about that.
Yeah.
It came out really good. I had her tell me the story like verbally, and I took notes while she was telling me. And then I ran over and I wrote something really fast. And I worried about word count last because I know word count is really tough. So
yes,
I wrote the piece and then I went back and chopped it up. But I do really love writing prose, but sometimes poetry is a little faster because if I have a cool image in my mind or a poem that I really love that I want to reference, poetry is like kind of instant. Whereas with prose, I have to really like wrestle with it and fight with it. But I do want to write something like a novella or a collection of poems or something so I can have a full body of work to publish sometime in the future. But it's hard to find the time and space to put that stuff down.
Yeah, with the busyness of daily life going on. Well, yeah, you can certainly do it. You're dedicated to the craft, and I think you could compile an anthology, like you're saying, whether it's a poetry or a novella or could be poetry and fiction and bits of nonfiction, just what that's the beautiful thing about the creative project. You have the idea and you can change the idea and see where it goes.
Yeah, for sure. No, I'm excited to be back into like the routine of writing, and I really like the Poetica challenge because it, if I have to write a poem every month and a half, I'll really get into like a muscle memory and flow state where I can create a lot of stuff, like a heavier volume of stuff. But just having a place that's like, all right, here's a deadline, create something. That's been really good.
Yeah. It holds you accountable, but it's also, and like you're saying, it's fun at the same time. It really brings you a lot of joy. It's not drab or dreadful. Yeah, it requires work and effort, but I like Ray Bradbury I can't remember the exact quote, but his big emphasis in his wonderful book is called Zen in the Art of Writing, and he stated that if you're not having fun, if you're not experiencing joy in your writing, go and do something else. Get the hell out of it.
For sure, yeah. Don't torture yourself for no reason. Yeah, and I'd love that. He just had the simple joy for the craft. He wasn't an academic. He wasn't ever a teacher. He grew up quite poor, and he made his way as a young writer, Fahrenheit 451, and science fiction fantasy works. But he, like you're just describing, that the joy that you get from the deadline, and you have the ideas, and you see where the ideas will go, and submitting, and it's very, very fun. And the joy you experience in the creative process is great. And it allows you to become a better writer, and you're exposed to other poets. I read some very, very interesting poems in the different anthologies that are very, very different. I mean, they're all wonderful, but just very, very different. So many different voices, and I like that. Yeah, for sure. Kind of piggybacking on that, before we kind of wrap it up, I was going to throw out a couple of ideas for you because obviously we're both writers, both creatives. We both listen to very similar music. We love similar people from literature. So a couple of things that came to mind. It might be kind of cool for us to challenge ourselves to, me write something in the style of Justin Wiggins and you write something in the style of Travis Grooms. That might be a cool idea.
Yeah.
And if you're not up for the task, another cool idea, we could write companion pieces. You can write something and then I can answer it and write like a response to it. That might be kind of fun.
Yeah, I would be up for both. That would be quite a good challenge and just something fun to see where it would go and collaborate. I've always enjoyed collaborating with different writers and musicians in the past, so I'm certainly up for both ideas. I think they're brilliant. Yeah.
That'd be a good that'd be a fun submission to Poetica one month. We can send our companion pieces to Grant and see if he picks up on it, that they are responding to each other, and if they get published together.
Would be quite
It might not work out if one person gets rejected, though. That would be a little sad.
Yeah, it's like, I did not make it in the anthology. I couldn't answer your question.
Yeah. I think that would be interesting. I would definitely, it would be a huge challenge to write something with your style because, like I said, it's very musical. You're very tight with your writing. Like, you don't waste any words. And the way that you play with like line structure and stuff, I'm a little more wordy and I'm a little more rambly. So,
Yeah.
I'm just going to call it Ode to Charlotte. I'm going to go ahead and throw it Celtic Charlotte or Ode to Charlotte. That would be the start.
I like that. I'll suppose I could read more Dickinson and read a lot of Sexton and reread your poems that I've read before, just to try to bring them all together and see what I could come up with. And I know you're a musician as well, so I could play around with that idea and sort of combine all of those together.
Yeah, I have a couple pieces published in Gravity Hill, which is the journal from the college where I got my English degree.
Wow.
So I could actually send you a couple of those too, so you have a bigger body of work to reference. Yeah. I have a short essay that was published that I'm really proud of. Yeah. It actually came from, I had a blog a long time ago, and I would do like a new post every week. And one of those essays I was really proud of, so I submitted it and it got published. So.
Congratulations, man!
Yeah, I would love to fill your table with a couple more things so you can kind of get a sense of my style.
Yeah.
It's not all death, I promise.
Yeah. Not all Dostoevsky like, no. I'll be glad to read your essay and your other poems you had published in the college. Is a college anthology or magazine? Yeah, so the college where I went was in Lombard, North Carolina, called St. Andrews University, and they have a journal called Gravity Hill. So there are a couple. They allow publication by alumni, current students, staff, like just the janitor that works at the school can submit a poem, so it's pretty cool. That's exciting, man. That must have been really incredible to hold something tangible in your hands when you have those published in the journal of your college. That's a big deal, too, because you're I guess, in the college years, you're trying to figure yourself out and trying to find your voice and not knowing if they will be accepted or not. So that's a big deal. That's incredibly exciting. Was that your first time getting your work published and having?
Yeah, that was my first experience. I took a few creative writing classes, and I really did kind of take the path of, like a career person with IT and tech and stuff. But I've always kept writing kind of close to my heart because, like you said, you have to have a creative outlet or you'll lose your mind. So back then, when I was right out of college and I was a much less refined writer, I had some pretty ambitious topics and ideas. Whenever you read the pieces, you'll see the difference in quality, and my age will show itself. But there are still a couple of things I'm proud of. So at least the stuff that got published, I'm excited to go back and read in the future. Yeah,
I'll be glad to read your work. I would be embarrassed to share with you poems I wrote 14 or 15 years ago. It is drivel, no exaggeration. It's so bad. It's so bad. So I don't.
I promise that there's stuff that I wrote when I was 15 or 16 that I wish it would just go away and it to exist. Well, if you want to do something like that, you just let me know. I'd be glad to take a stab at a Justin Wiggins poem, but maybe we could collaborate a little bit and come up with some cool things. I really appreciate you, jumping on call and talking about literature and some of our heroes and reading our pieces, and kind of the call and response is always fun. So I'll keep my eye out for more of your work, and if I catch anything that really sticks with me, I'll definitely message you about it.
Thank you, my friend. Yes, I'll look forward to reading more of your work that you'll be submitting, and look forward to the literary challenge. And it's been great to enjoy this conversation with you.
All right, bonus clip has begun.
Right, so I'm going to read my poem Writer from Writing from the Heart, published by Inspired Poets on Writing. It was collected by J. Jenkins Scott and Robbie Taylor, illustrated by Adam Stanley. This is Adam Stanley's wonderful illustration of the typewriter, and thanks to Steve Cault's son, Charlie Cault, for getting the anthology out there, and it's an honor to be part of the Inspired Writers community. And this is called Writer. I write to amuse, delight, and move people. I write to pose questions, understand, and transcend the feeble limitations of reason. It is immensely important, but it has its limits. 'Tis always the season for this writer to convey goodness, beauty, and truth, to inspire, encourage, cultivate, community, and pursue a vocation filled with challenge, delight, wonder, and jubilation. Writing is my passion, and from disillusionment, my emancipation.
But yeah, that's cool.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, it's got that Justin Wiggins flow to it. It's definitely it's musical. It's direct. You're not wasting words. The little tricks with internal rhyme and stuff like that are fun. So again, I'm gonna try to write one of these one day.
Yeah,
you're going to see a poem of mine and you're going to say, oh, that sounds like me.
Yeah, and I'll look forward to writing one that sounds like Travis Grooms. Take you up on the challenge. And yeah, thank you. That one was written in honor of Steve Cault of Inspired. He was very well appreciated and loved by many people. And it's incredible seeing his son Charlie Cault carrying on his legacy with the Inspired Writers community.
Yeah, it's really nice, and congrats on being a part of that community and just, getting a piece in there, just because when someone passes away who is compiling work, like obviously there's some uncertainty and you don't know how many more things are going to be available to publish. So it is really cool that the family is continuing and you have more opportunity to continue that tradition for sure.
Yeah, thank you. Let's hear the essay.
All right. I was hoping you picked that.
Yes.
This one was written a long time ago, and out of all the things that I've written 5+ years ago, this is probably the piece that I'm most proud of, just because I think it holds up, and I think the point that I was trying to make actually still makes sense to me. But this was from a blog that I had, and it still exists online. It was a blogger piece. It's pretty short, but I'll say it's 2.5 pages, but I read pretty fast, so I'll try to get through it.
Yeah, look forward to hearing it, my friend.
This is called When I Look at the Stars, Switchfoot reference, The Perception of Time. Recently, I listened to A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. Although I'm not math-minded or very good at understanding scientific concepts, I really enjoyed the theories and history of scientific development. Perhaps the most striking concepts in the book are those about time. It's not often that we think of time as something malleable or relative to who, where, and when we are. A good starting point is to consider age itself, specifically age as it applies to human beings. The initial thought, I suspect, is that age is something defined by scientific law and easy to calculate. To us, aging is a very linear experience. I intend to dive a little deeper, however. Consider this. A human baby is born to a woman who's 35 years old. After the first year of life, the baby is 1, and his or her mother is 36. If we divide 1 by 36, we find that this child's life overlaps about 2.78% of his or her mother's life. Now we fast forward 30 years. The child, now an adult, is 31, and his or her mother is 66. Our new percentage is 46.97, which is rapidly nearing half of the parent's life. Time does not speed up during development, yet somehow the gap quickly closes. One more calculation. If we jump another 30 years, we have a 61-year-old and a 96-year-old, or 63.54% overlap. The child who once knew nothing of its mother's life now knows the majority. At a distance, it feels as though the child is aging more quickly than its parent when they're aging at the same rate. So many developments and changes have occurred for this baby, while much less is developing or changing for the parent, at least in the later stages of life. Maybe young adults feel as though time is racing forward, despite the opposite being true as children. I say all of this to demonstrate the key concept of the piece. Time is obedient to the laws of the universe, yet somehow highly relative at the same time. Now, to consider real-life application, I'll start with a question. Why do so many humans balk at the thought of a 35-year-old and a 25-year-old in a romantic relationship? Yet they don't think twice about a 65-year-old and a 55-year-old together. If the age gap is 10 years in both cases, the culprit must be perception. As humans, our opinions change. At some point, we stop caring about age and care more about genuine feelings. In his book, Hawking talks a little about the fact that things we see in the visible universe are not necessarily happening in real time. An exploding star in the night sky is already non-existent. That is, it exploded in the past, but because of distance, we see the event sometime after it occurred. This is difficult to grasp at first. I never considered the possibility that my sense of time could be misled. The nice thing is, I can now approach time as a skeptic, in some situations, of course. Now I approach another real-life example. Young adults in romantic relationships maintain some sense of infatuation, especially in the early stages of knowing a significant other. Often this is so extreme that they say things like, I cannot imagine life without you, or I will always love you. I understand that many of these relationships become marriages that last a lifetime. I'm speaking to those which do not, those which collapse. The feelings once described as infinite quickly fizzle out. First, the brokenhearted replays all the most painful moments of the relationship, questions all his or her decisions which led to the end, and wrestles with regret. 6 months later, the brokenhearted swears off love, determining that the single life is the only safe life, and that no other romantic partner is adequate. A year later, the brokenhearted is no longer brokenhearted, albeit a little cold toward love. At some undefined point in the future, the now healed individual is once again vulnerable, and has turned his or her attention toward a new mate. The cliche, time heals all wounds, seems to be factual. Again, time is relative. I speak from experience when I say that the feelings return, given time. Love does not obey any laws. It is practically a character independent of all writers, a self-developed and ever-changing eccentric character which acts of its own accord and somehow affects all people. Obviously, love is the ultimate defiler of time. I encourage readers to spend less effort on things parallel with time and more effort on things outside of it. The most extraordinary aspects of life are inexplicable and unconventional. Take the time to observe the stars and speculate how far in the past they are. Then proceed.
Brilliant. I thoroughly enjoyed you sharing. Very good essay. I like the Switchfoot reference. Yeah, your exploration of Stephen Hawking was a genius. His theories of time and relativity, and your musings on the complaints about people being in their 25 and 35. Why are they in a relationship? Well, it's none of your business, and they're old enough to be in a consensual, secure relationship together. Whereas there's no complaints about the 50 and 65, 55, 65 year olds. So, yeah, I enjoyed your insights about the awe of not just the stars, but being in awe of the universe and the limits of logical empiricism and leaving room for mystery and wonder. That's what I get from it. Very good. Very good.
Yeah. It's one of those things where I watched the film and then I listened to the audiobook and then I sort of had an immediate response, specifically to that part about the star exploding. And whenever you see it happen, it's already happened a long time ago. It's just that it takes the light so long to get to where we are that we don't even see it until later. And so I sort of started piecing together that theme, like with other things like love, relationships, and how they are the most impactful thing in the moment. And then they end and then we're super sad, but sometime later we're not sad anymore. So,
Yes.
it is really funny and it's really interesting how time can be such a mystery, but at the same time so scientific. So
yes,
that's what I was playing with. It's kind of like I've always had a little tiny bit of distrust towards science, and as with you, I appreciate myth way more.
Yes, yeah, that's very true. Yes, science, and as important as it is, the logical empirical worldview certainly has its limits and is based on finite human understanding and is always advancing and correcting itself, and it doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of, the metaphysics or philosophy, the divine, the transcendent.
Yeah, we don't even understand 1% of our universe, and every 3 years what we thought we understood is changed.
Yeah, very true. Very true.